Soyuz 11. On June 30th, 1971, the Soviet space mission Soyuz 11 was preparing for its final descent after a historic achievement. Cosmonauts Georgy Dobrovolsky, Viktor Patsayev, and Vladislav Volkov had spent 23 days aboard Salyut 1, the world's first space station, a milestone in space history. But what should have been a heroic return turned into one of the most chilling deaths in space history. As the descent capsule entered the atmosphere, Mission Control noticed something strange. The re-entry seemed normal. No alarms, no distress calls. But after the capsule landed and was opened, all three men were found dead in their seats. Their faces were frozen in place. Blood trickled from their noses and ears. The investigation revealed that during separation from the orbital module, a pressure equalization valve had opened prematurely, depressurizing the capsule in less than 30 seconds. The cosmonauts weren't wearing pressure suits. There was no warning, no backup, no escape. In space, even a small leak becomes a death sentence. They likely lost consciousness within 15 seconds. Their blood had begun to boil internally. It was silent. It was fast. It was fatal. After Soyuz 11, all future missions required cosmonauts to wear pressure suits during launch and landing. The Columbia disaster. On February 1st, 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia was returning to Earth after a successful 16-day mission. On board were 7 astronauts, 6 Americans and 1 Israeli, experienced, joyful, and ready to return home. But they never made it. As Columbia re-entered Earth's atmosphere, it began to disintegrate over Texas. The cause? A brief moment during launch, a suitcase-sized piece of foam insulation broke off the external fuel tank and struck the shuttle's left wing, punching a small hole in its heat shield. That tiny hole was fatal. As the shuttle descended, superheated plasma from atmospheric re-entry seeped into the wing. The internal structure melted from within. The wing collapsed. The shuttle broke apart at 14,000 miles per hour. Inside, the astronauts had no idea anything was wrong. The cockpit voice recorder captured their final words, calm, procedural chatter, until the moment the shuttle was violently torn apart. The cabin depressurized. The crew lost consciousness within seconds. Some were thrown violently. Others died in their seats. Trapped in flight suits, they never had time to escape. By the time debris rained down across Texas and Louisiana, all 7 were gone. The disaster led to a 2-year grounding of the shuttle program and a total redesign of NASA's flight safety systems. But the memory of those final moments, sudden, quiet, and completely preventable, remains a haunting warning. Soyuz 1. On April 23, 1967, Soviet cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov launched aboard Soyuz 1-, a spacecraft known to have more than 200 reported design flaws. Komarov knew it. The engineers knew it. Even his friend, Yuri Gagarin, begged for the mission to be cancelled. But Komarov flew anyway, understanding full well that he would likely die. It was a political decision, one that would cost him everything. From the moment Soyuz 1 launched, systems began to fail. The solar panels didn't deploy. The craft lost power. Attitude control failed. He couldn't properly orient the spacecraft for re-entry. When Komarov finally tried to return to Earth, the parachutes failed to deploy. The main chute was tangled. The backup chute was damaged. There was no way to slow down. The capsule hit the Earth at full speed and exploded. Witnesses described the impact as a crater of fire and twisted metal. His body was barely recognizable, burned, broken, and fused to the wreckage. Recordings later revealed his final radio transmissions. He screamed, cried, and cursed the officials who sent him to die. Komarov became the first person to die during a spaceflight. His death, avoidable and political, shook the Soviet space program to its core. Apollo 1. On January 27, 1967, astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee sat inside the Apollo 1 capsule for a routine ground test. The rocket was unfueled. The launch pad was secure. It was just a rehearsal. But inside the sealed cabin, something was wrong. The atmosphere was 100% oxygen at high pressure, highly flammable. Under Grissom's seat, a wire sparked. The fire spread through the capsule like a bomb. Plastic and nylon combusted instantly. The oxygen-fed flames melted insulation and spread across the walls. Within seconds, the astronauts were engulfed. They tried to open the hatch, but it opened inward. And under the cabin pressure, it was impossible to budge. Screams echoed in the communication line. "We've got a fire in the cockpit." Then, silence. When rescue crews finally opened the hatch 5 minutes later, they found a charred nightmare. All 3 astronauts were dead, burned alive inside their suits, fused to the metal frame of the capsule. Apollo 1 never left the ground, but it changed everything. The fire grounded NASA's moon program for 20 months and led to a complete overhaul of spacecraft design. The cost was 3 lives, lost not in space, but preparing to reach it. Challenger. On January 28, 1986, Space Shuttle Challenger lifted off with 7 astronauts aboard, including Krista McAuliffe, the first civilian teacher selected to go to space. Millions of people tuned in live. It was meant to inspire a generation. Instead, it became one of the darkest moments in American history. Just 73 seconds into the flight, the shuttle exploded. A rubber O-ring in one of the rocket boosters had failed due to freezing overnight temperatures. The booster flame leaked, igniting the external fuel tank and tearing the shuttle apart. On national television, the world watched the pieces fall into the Atlantic Ocean. But here's the haunting truth. The crew cabin remained intact during the explosion. It continued rising briefly, then arced and fell. For 25 horrifying seconds, the astronauts were likely still alive, plummeting 45,000 feet. The cabin hit the ocean at over 200 miles per hour. The impact was unsurvivable. The explosion was visible, the deaths were silent, and the consequences reshaped public trust in spaceflight forever. The Nedelin Catastrophe. On October 24, 1960, the Soviet Union was rushing to launch its newest missile, the R-16. Under intense political pressure, Marshal Mitrofan Nedelin ordered work to continue even while the rocket was fully fueled, a lethal violation of safety protocol. Dozens of engineers and military officials stood nearby as they made final adjustments. Then, without warning, the second stage of the rocket ignited on the launch pad. Flames shot out, engulfing the platform. The missile exploded moments later. Those closest were vaporized instantly. Others were trapped behind barriers or consumed by fire. Some tried to run, but the heat overtook them. The blaze lasted 20 minutes. Over 120 people died, including Nedelin himself. The Soviet Union denied the disaster for years. Photos were destroyed, names erased. It was the deadliest launch pad accident in history, and nobody outside the USSR knew it had even happened. Valentin Bondarenko. In March 1961, Soviet cosmonaut trainee Valentin Bondarenko was performing a 15-day endurance test in a pressure chamber filled with pure oxygen. At the end of his shift, Bondarenko removed his biosensors and cleaned the skin with alcohol-soaked cotton. He tossed the swab into a trash bin near a hot plate. It ignited. Within seconds, the chamber turned into an inferno. The pure oxygen fed the flames with explosive speed. Technicians outside couldn't open the hatch. The pressure difference made it impossible. By the time they got inside, Bondarenko's body was covered in third-degree burns. He died later that night in the hospital, just weeks before Gagarin's historic flight. The Soviets erased him from history. His death was a secret until the 1980s. He never reached space, but his sacrifice paved the way for those who did. That's all, folks. Comment part 2 if you'd like me to do another video on the worst deaths in space history. Until then, subscribe to the Everyday Explainer for more such videos.